I'd been working the overnight shift at Cedar Grove Rest Area for 3 years when I found the rules. 3 years of fluorescent lights and empty hallways, of truckers stumbling in at odd hours and families with crying kids making bathroom runs. The place sat 40 miles from the nearest town, some little nowhere called Millbrook, right along Interstate 80 where the highway cut through dense Pennsylvania forest. Most nights I saw maybe 20 people total. Semis pulling in for their mandatory rest breaks, their drivers shuffling to the vending machines with quarters already counted out. Minivans with out-of-state plates, parents looking half dead while their kids bounced off the walls. The occasional sedan with someone who just needed to stretch their legs or take a piss before the next 100 miles of nothing. I liked the quiet. Needed it, really. The isolation was what drew me to the posting in the first place. After Grace and I split, I couldn't stand being around people. Couldn't stand the questions, the concerned looks, the whole performance of pretending I was doing fine when I felt hollowed out. Cedar Grove offered something better than sympathy. It offered distance. Miles and miles of it wrapped in darkness and the steady hum of highway traffic that never quite stopped. Grace had been practical about the whole thing. No screaming, no thrown dishes. Just a conversation in our kitchen on a Sunday morning where she told me she couldn't live with someone who'd stopped being present. Said I'd been checking out for months, maybe longer. Said she deserved more than a husband who treated their apartment like a way station between shifts. She wasn't wrong. I'd signed the lease on a studio place the following week. Put in for the transfer to Cedar Grove 2 days after that. Rodney Woods, my supervisor, had called me into his office at the district depot to talk it through. "You sure about this?" Rodney had a way of cutting straight to it. No small talk, no easing into difficult subjects. He'd sat behind his metal desk with his arms crossed, those small brown eyes studying me from under bushy gray eyebrows. Cedar Grove's about as remote as it gets. Overnight shift means you're alone out there. No backup if something goes sideways. No co-workers to shoot the shit with during slow hours. That's fine. Most guys don't last 6 months. He tapped a thick finger on the paperwork between us. Gets to people. The quiet, the dark. Nothing but trees and highway for miles in every direction. I'll be fine. He'd studied me another moment, then shrugged and signed off on the transfer. Your funeral. But it wasn't a funeral. It was exactly what I needed. The rest area itself was standard PennDOT construction. Cinder block building painted beige, 2 sets of bathrooms, a vending machine alcove, a few picnic tables outside under a pavilion. My station was a converted storage room near the back, just big enough for a desk, a filing cabinet, and a cot I never used. The maintenance closet sat directly across the hall, packed with cleaning supplies and the ancient floor buffer that sounded like a dying animal when you fired it up. I'd fallen into a rhythm those first 3 years. Clock in at 11 p.m., do a walkthrough of the facilities, check that everything was stocked and functional, mop the floors around 2 a.m. when traffic dropped to almost nothing, spend the rest of the shift reading or watching shows on my phone, doing bathroom checks every hour, nodding at the handful of travelers who passed through, clock out at 7 when Floyd Meyer arrived for the day shift. Floyd was good people. 63 years old, retired from a machinist job in Erie, took the Cedar Grove posting because it gave him something to do, and the hours didn't conflict with his fishing schedule. He'd been working there for 8 years, longer than anyone else, and he'd taken it upon himself to show me the ropes when I first started. Key thing is consistency. He told me during my second week. People feel safer when they see you're on top of things. Keep it clean, keep it stocked, keep yourself visible. Most of your job is just being present. I'd managed that much, at least. Being present at Cedar Grove was easier than being present anywhere else. Tuesday started like any other shift. November wind rattling the building's metal roof, temperature dropping into the 30s. I'd clocked in, done my initial walkthrough, waved at a trucker getting coffee from the vending machine. The men's room had needed attention. Someone's kid had apparently tried to use an entire roll of toilet paper in one go, but otherwise everything was standard. Around 1 a.m., I headed to the maintenance closet for the mop bucket. That's when I saw the envelope. It was manila, the old-fashioned kind with the metal clasp and string wound in a figure 8 to keep it closed. Someone had slipped it under the closet door, far enough in that I nearly stepped on it when I pulled the door open. I picked it up. No writing on the outside, no markings at all. Just worn manila paper that felt thin between my fingers, like it had been handled plenty before ending up on my floor. I carried it back to my desk before opening it. The metal clasp was stiff, resisting for a moment before giving way with a soft pop. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed, the kind that comes out of old typewriters or printers that haven't been replaced since the 90s. 7 rules, numbered and typed in a font I didn't recognize. Courier, maybe, or something close to it. Cedar Grove. Rest area. Overnight attendant protocols. 1. Never acknowledge anyone standing in the tree line after 2 a.m. They are not waiting for a ride. 2. If all the lights in the building go out simultaneously, remain at your desk for exactly 10 minutes before investigating. Do not leave your station early, regardless of what you hear. 3. Check bathroom mirrors every hour. If you see a reflection that does not match the physical space, leave immediately and lock the door. Do not attempt to investigate the discrepancy. 4. The woman in the blue sedan will ask for directions to Route 322. Give her the correct directions. She will not take them. 5. If you hear knocking from inside the vending machines, unplug them and leave them dark until dawn. Do not open the machine panels. 6. Between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. you may hear children playing outside. The rest area has no playground. Stay inside. 7. If someone asks whether you are Paul Spencer, say no. Give a different name each time. I read through the list twice, then a third time. My first reaction was laughter, short and sharp in the empty office. Some asshole had gone to decent effort on this one. Yellowed paper, official-sounding header, the whole 9 yards. Probably one of the highway crew guys who resurfaced the parking lot last month. They'd seemed bored as hell, spending their breaks smoking by their trucks and staring at their phones. This felt like the kind of stupid prank bored workers would cook up. The details were good. I'd give them that. Specific enough to sound almost plausible, weird enough to be unsettling if you were inclined to spook. Never acknowledge anyone in the tree line. Reflections that don't match reality. The woman in the blue sedan. That last rule was the tell, though. If someone asks whether you are Paul Spencer, say no. They'd used my actual name. That meant someone who knew me, or at least knew who worked this shift. Probably Floyd, come to think of it. He had that dry sense of humor, the kind that didn't announce itself with a smile. I could picture him typing this up at home, aging the paper somehow, sliding it under the closet door during his shift before I arrived. I laughed again, shook my head. The thing was, I didn't mind. It was harmless, kind of creative actually. Better than the usual hazing new guys got, being sent to find non-existent tools or told to check on equipment that didn't exist. This had personality to it. I stood up, carried the paper to the corkboard above my desk where I kept the shift schedule and emergency contact numbers. Found a pushpin in the desk drawer, pinned the rules right in the center of the board. They looked official enough there, hanging next to Rodney's printed schedule and the faded poster about proper chemical handling. Someone's joke, immortalized above my workspace where I could glance at it during the long, empty hours and remember that people still had a sense of humor about this weird job. I had no idea that night would change everything I believed about the world. No idea that within hours, I'd be checking those rules with shaking hands, trying to figure out which protocol applied to what I was seeing. No idea that the list wasn't hazing at all. But right then, at 1:15 on a quiet Tuesday morning, I just smiled at my corkboard and went back to work. I spotted her through the east window during my second walkthrough of the night. Woman standing right where the parking lot ended and the tree line began. just standing there, facing the building. I glanced at my watch, 2:47 in the morning, then back out the window. She hadn't moved. The lot was empty except for one semi parked way over by the truck slots, driver presumably asleep in his cab. Nobody else around, just her, standing at that hard edge where asphalt gave way to forest. I moved closer to the glass. Her dress caught my attention first. Thin material, pale, hard to tell the exact color under the sodium lights, but something light, cream maybe, or faded yellow, the kind of summer dress you'd wear to a backyard barbecue. It was November, 42 degrees when I'd checked the thermometer at shift start. Cold enough I'd needed my jacket walking from the truck to the building. She wasn't wearing a coat. Wind was picking up out there. I could see it moving through the pine branches behind her, could see the way the parking lot lights swayed slightly on their poles. But her dress didn't move. Her hair didn't move. She just stood there, completely still, staring at the building. Staring at me, maybe. I couldn't make out her face clearly from this distance, but I could feel the intensity of her focus. The way you can feel someone watching you sometimes, that prickle at the back of your neck. My hand started to rise. Automatic response, the kind of polite acknowledgement you give when you make eye contact with someone. Just a little wave, I see you there gesture. Then Rule 1 slammed into my brain. Do not acknowledge anyone standing at the edge of the parking lot after dark. My arm froze halfway up. Literally froze. Muscles locked. Like my body had thrown an emergency brake. The rules. Floyd's rules, pinned to my corkboard not 4 hours ago. The ones I'd laughed about figured for some elaborate prank on the new night shift guy. I lowered my hand slowly, carefully, like any sudden movement might set something off. The woman's head tilted, not the way a person normally moves, not the natural shift of weight, the casual turn to look at something. This was mechanical, deliberate. Her whole head tilted to the left in one smooth motion, maybe 30 degrees, and even from 60 feet away I could tell she was looking directly at me. She'd sensed it, the almost wave, the near acknowledgement. My throat went dry. We stood there, separated by glass and distance and something else I didn't have words for. Her head tilted at that unnatural angle. Me pressed close to the window, hand still half raised like an idiot. Then she was gone, not walking away, not turning and disappearing into the trees, just gone. There 1 second, absent the next, the way a TV picture vanishes when you hit the power button. One frame she existed, the next frame she didn't. I stumbled backward from the window. My shoulder hit the wall behind me. The impact jarred my teeth together, but I barely felt it. Just kept staring at that spot where she'd been standing, where nothing stood now except empty asphalt and the dark line of trees. My heart was hammering, actual hammering, like it was trying to break through my ribs. The rules weren't a joke. I crossed the lobby in maybe 6 strides. Didn't run. Some part of my brain still functioning on autopilot, still following protocols, still maintaining the careful competence I'd built over 3 years of this job. But I moved fast. The corkboard hung exactly where I'd left it. Shift logs, phone numbers, Floyd's scrawled notes about the coffee maker acting up, and the yellow legal paper with its neat handwritten list. My hand shook when I grabbed it. Actually shook, fingers trembling hard enough that the paper rattled. I yanked it free, the thumbtack scattered across the desk, and held it under the fluorescent light. Overnight shift protocols for Cedar Grove rest area. I read the whole thing again, every word, every rule. Do not acknowledge anyone standing at the edge of the parking lot after dark. I'd almost waved. Almost broke the first goddamn rule on the list. Would have broken it if the memory hadn't surfaced at exactly the right second. What would have happened if I'd completed that wave? My stomach lurched. I swallowed hard against the sudden taste of bile. If you hear knocking from inside the family restroom after 11 p.m., Place an out-of-order sign on the door and do not open it until morning. The vending machines sometimes dispense items that weren't selected. Don't comment on this. Don't try to return the incorrect item. If all the lights in the building go out at once, stay where you are and count to 60 before moving. Do not call maintenance. I thought these were weird, quirky, the kind of superstitious nonsense that builds up around any job where people work alone at night. But that woman, that dress in November weather, the way she tilted her head when the paper crumpled slightly in my grip. I smoothed it out carefully, set it on the desk. Read through the list a third time, then a fourth. Check the parking lot every 30 minutes. If you see a red sedan with no license plates, note the time, but do not approach the vehicle. The PA system will sometimes activate on its own. If you hear breathing through the speakers, turn the system off at the main panel and leave it off for the remainder of your shift. 15 rules total. 15 specific detailed instructions about things that shouldn't happen but apparently did. I pulled out my phone. No signal this far from town, but the camera still worked. I photographed the list, making sure every word was legible, then set the phone aside and picked up the paper again. My watch read 3:08. Dawn was at 6:43 this time of year. 3.5 hours. I started memorizing. Used the same technique I'd learned in high school for vocabulary tests. Read a rule, close my eyes, recite it back. Check for accuracy. Move to the next one. Do not acknowledge anyone standing at the edge of the parking lot after dark. Had it down cold already. That one was burned into my brain now, probably permanently. If you hear knocking from inside the family restroom after 11 p.m., place an out-of-order sign on the door and do not open it until morning. I could picture the family restroom. Single occupancy, larger than the regular stalls, located at the far end of the men's side. Had a changing table, extra space for strollers and wheelchairs. I'd cleaned it 100 times during training. Never heard knocking from inside it. Hoped I never would. The vending machines sometimes dispense items that weren't selected. Don't comment on this. Don't try to return the incorrect item. 3 rules down. 12 to go. I paced while I memorized. Couldn't sit still. Needed to move. The lobby wasn't big, maybe 40 feet from the entrance to the hallway leading to the restrooms, but I walked it in loops. Desk to window to door to hallway and back. Every circuit I glanced outside. Checked that spot where she'd been standing. Nothing there. Just asphalt and trees and the cold November night. Check the parking lot every 30 minutes. If you see a red sedan with no license plates, note the time but do not approach the vehicle. Why note the time? What difference did the time make? Didn't matter. The rule said note it, so I'd note it. The PA system will sometimes activate on its own. If you hear breathing through the speakers, turn the system off at the main panel and leave it off for the remainder of your shift. Breathing through speakers. Christ. I rubbed my face, realized my hands had finally stopped shaking. 3:34. 2 rules memorized for every 10 minutes. If I kept this pace, I'd have the whole list down by 4:30, then could spend the remaining time drilling them until they were automatic. During your rounds, if you find wet footprints leading from the building exit toward the forest, mop them immediately. Do not follow them outside. The mop was in the utility closet, industrial bucket, yellow with a wringer attachment. I knew where everything was in that closet. Cleaning solutions on the top shelf, paper products on the middle, tools and equipment on the bottom. Might need to grab that mop tonight. Better to know where it was. Have a plan ready. If someone asks you for directions to the old road, tell them you're new and don't know the area. Do not ask them to clarify. Easy enough. I was new to night shift, even if I'd worked days for years. Technically true. The break room coffee maker will occasionally turn itself on. This is normal. Pour the coffee down the sink and start a fresh pot. I'd already seen the note Floyd left about the coffee maker acting up. Guess that's what he'd meant. If you see a child alone in the parking lot, observe from inside. If they wave at you, wave back. If they don't wave, do not acknowledge them. My stomach went cold. A child, alone at a rest stop in the middle of the night. And the response depended on whether they waved first? What kind of... No. Didn't matter what kind. The rule was the rule. Woman in the pale dress had already proven that. I kept memorizing. Between 2 and 4 a.m., you may hear a vehicle pull up to the gas pumps. There are no gas pumps at this facility. Do not investigate. The old foundation was still visible out by the truck parking, concrete pad where pumps used to stand before they were removed. Sometime in the 80s, Floyd had mentioned, before the interstate bypass got built. Motion sensors in the restrooms will sometimes trigger when no one is present. This is normal. Reset them using the panel in your office. Office. My office now, I guess. The little room off the main lobby with the desk and filing cabinets and ancient computer. If the phone rings and no one speaks when you answer, say, "Wrong number," and hang up. Do not engage further. Do not enter the forest behind the building for any reason. The exterior lights will occasionally flicker in sequence from north to south. When this happens, verify all doors are locked and remain inside until the pattern stops. If you find coins arranged in a circle anywhere in the building, collect them and place them in the donation box. Do not keep them. Before leaving at the end of your shift, check the lost and found box. If there's an item you don't remember anyone turning in, leave it there. 15 rules. I went through them again, then again. 4:03. The semi that had been parked in the truck section started up, diesel engine rumbling through the night. I watched it pull out, tail lights disappearing down the access road toward the interstate. Alone now. Just me in the building and whatever else was out there in the dark. I recited the rules under my breath. Made myself go through the whole list without looking at the paper. Got 13 out of 15 on the first try. Missed the part about motion sensors and fumbled the wording on the exterior lights. Tried again. 14 out of 15. Again, perfect recitation. The sky was starting to lighten when I finally looked up from the paper. Not sunrise yet, but that thin gray quality that comes before dawn. 5:47 by my watch. I'd been memorizing for 2.5 hours. Could recite every rule forward and backward. Could probably recite them in my sleep at this point. Had gone through them so many times, the words had lost meaning and become pure rhythm. But I understood now. Understood that these rules weren't suggestions or guidelines or workplace superstition. They were survival instructions, and I was going to follow them exactly. By Thursday, I had the list memorized. Didn't need the laminated card anymore, though I still carried it in my shirt pocket like a talisman. 7 rules. Simple enough to remember, but complicated enough that I found myself running through them during every shift, testing my recall the way I used to test myself on multiplication tables in grade school. Rule 1. All exterior lights stay on from dusk to dawn. Never investigated a flicker or outage alone. Rule 2. If the building settled with 3 distinct creaks in a row, I had to turn on the radio in the break room and leave it playing until sunrise. Those first 2 seemed straightforward. Maintenance protocols dressed up in superstition, maybe. The kind of thing that made sense in an old building sitting on unstable ground. But Rule 3, that's where things got specific in a way that made my skin crawl. Don't accept food from travelers who can't name their destination. I'd turned that one over in my head for days. What kind of traveler couldn't say where they were going? Rest areas saw all types. Truckers on familiar routes, families on vacation, lost souls just driving to drive. But everyone had somewhere in mind, even if it was just away from here. The rule implied there'd be travelers who'd offer me food and then stand there blank-faced, unable to answer a simple question. Implied I'd know enough to ask. Rule 4 addressed something more concrete but equally unsettling. If both emergency phones rang at the same time, the one in the main building and the one out by the truck parking area, I was supposed to lock all the doors immediately, keep them locked until the ringing stopped no matter who was outside waiting to get in. I'd tested those phones on Tuesday, picked up each receiver, listened to the dial tone, made sure the lines worked independently. They did. Separate circuits, separate phone numbers listed on separate signs. No reason they'd ever ring simultaneously unless someone was calling both at once, or unless something else was happening that had nothing to do with normal phone calls. Rule 5, though. That's the one that followed me home, that crept into my thoughts during the day when I was supposed to be sleeping. If you hear your own voice calling from outside, do not respond. Do not approach the doors. Stay in the break room until sunrise. I'd lie in my apartment staring at the ceiling, imagining it, my own voice shouting my own name from the darkness beyond the windows. Would I recognize it? Would it sound exactly right, or would there be something off about it? Some uncanny valley quality that would warn me away? And what the hell would happen if I answered? The list didn't say. None of the rules explained consequences. They just stated protocols with the flat certainty of engineering specifications. Do this, don't do that. The why wasn't my concern. Except it was. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Thursday afternoon, I drove to Cedar Grove 2 hours before my shift started. Found Floyd in the maintenance closet, replacing paper towel dispensers with the methodical patience of someone who'd done the task 1,000 times. "We need to talk," I said. He didn't look up. Just pulled another dispenser from the cardboard box at his feet. Checked the spring mechanism. About what? Not a question. A statement that already knew the answer. The rules. I pulled the laminated card from my pocket. These real? Floyd installed the dispenser, pressed it closed, tugged on the paper towel to test it. Only then did he turn to face me. "You see something?" Tuesday night. Woman in the parking lot. 2:47 in the morning, standing at the tree line. I watched his face. Followed her back and forth along the windows for 43 minutes. She never blinked. Something shifted behind Floyd's pale blue eyes. Not surprise. Recognition, maybe. Or resignation. "You go outside?" "No." "Good." He bent down for another dispenser. "Then the rules are working." I stepped into the closet doorway, blocking his path to the next bathroom. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." "Floyd, you want me to tell you it's a joke?" His voice stayed level, that gravelly rumble barely above a whisper. "Want me to say the guys in maintenance are hazing the new overnight attendant? Been here 3 years, Paul. You think we'd keep it going that long?" Fair point. I'd watched 2 other overnight attendants come and go in my time here. Neither had lasted more than 4 months. Neither had mentioned rules or lists or women who didn't blink. "What happened to them?" I asked. "The other attendants." Floyd carried the dispenser past me into the men's room. I followed. "Marcus transferred to the Harrisburg facility. Put in the request after 6 weeks. Floyd removed the empty dispenser, tossed it in his cart. Said his wife didn't like him working nights. And the other one? Jeremy? The new dispenser clicked into place. Floyd tested it twice before answering. Jeremy didn't follow protocols. My stomach went cold. What does that mean? Means exactly what I said. Floyd moved past me again, heading for the women's room. Didn't follow protocols, didn't last. I grabbed his arm, felt the muscle underneath his flannel shirt still solid despite his age. "Floyd, what the fuck is going on here?" He looked down at my hand on his sleeve. I let go. "You know the Seneca Nation used to control most of this territory," he said finally. Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Had these lands for centuries before white folks showed up. What's that got to do with... had sacred places, burial grounds, sites where they'd perform ceremonies. Floyd's eyes fixed on something past my shoulder, and they had places they avoided, places they wouldn't go even when game was scarce, even when they were desperate. The hallway felt colder. I'd worked here 3 years and never noticed how the temperature dropped in the interior corridors, away from the heating vents. This rest area, Floyd continued, voice even quieter now, sits on land the Seneca wouldn't touch. Something about it. Something thin between this world and whatever's underneath. That's folklore. Floyd's mouth twisted, not quite a smile. Sure, that's what the state archaeologists said too, back when they were surveying the site. What the construction foreman said when his crew kept quitting. What every highway administrator has said for 43 years. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, unfolded it carefully, the creases worn soft from repeated handling. Names. A list of names written in different hands, different inks, some faded nearly to illegibility. Every attendant who's worked overnight here since Cedar Grove opened, Floyd said. 37 people. 12 of them are marked with asterisks. I scanned the list, saw the asterisks scattered through the years, saw the most recent one next to a name I recognized. Jeremy Keller. What happened to them? Vanished. Floyd refolded the paper. No bodies, no evidence, just gone. Sometimes their cars stayed in the parking lot. Sometimes their uniforms turned up folded in the maintenance closet, clean and pressed. He tucked the list back in his pocket. Always the same. Always people who didn't follow the protocols. My mouth had gone dry. What protocols? The rules on that card? Cards new. Had them written down official maybe 8 years ago, after we lost 2 attendants in one summer. Floyd finally met my eyes. But the protocols themselves? Those go back to the beginning. Back to when the first night attendants started seeing things and the Seneca priest came to bless the building. A priest blessed. Brooklyn Salazar, medicine woman from the Allegheny Territory. She's the one who told us what we needed to do to keep this place from swallowing people whole. Floyd picked up his cart, told us there were rules, boundaries. Long as we respected them, we'd be safe. And if we don't? Floyd's silence stretched out between us, heavy as the weight of all those names on his list. If you break a rule accidentally, I said. If you make a mistake. What then? He pushed the cart down the hallway, stopped at the far end, silhouetted against the fluorescent lights. Don't, he said. Then he was gone, and I was standing alone in a corridor that suddenly felt much longer than it had any right to be. The emergency phones went off at 11:38. Not one phone, all 3 of them at once. The one by the vending machines, the one outside the men's room, the one near the information kiosk, screaming in perfect unison. That mechanical shriek that emergency phones make, the sound designed to cut through panic and distance and get attention fast. I was at the maintenance closet when it started, dropped the mop I'd been holding and just stood there for maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3, while my brain tried to process what I was hearing. Emergency phones didn't ring. They were for calling out, not receiving calls. Hardwired directly to state police dispatch, one-way communication systems that shouldn't have been capable of receiving incoming signals at all. But they were ringing, all of them, that shrieking pulse bouncing off the tile and glass until the whole building felt like it was screaming. Then I was moving. Didn't think about it, just dropped everything and ran for the main entrance, my boots hitting the floor hard enough that I could feel the impact in my knees. The key ring was already in my hand, muscle memory from 3 years of overnight shifts, always keeping the important keys accessible. My fingers found the lock key while I was still 10 feet away. Rule number 1. Lock all doors immediately if the emergency phones activate. I'd read that rule a dozen times, 24, memorized it along with the others until I could recite them in my sleep. but I'd never actually thought about what it would mean to follow it. Never considered the mechanics of getting 4 sets of doors locked while 3 phones screamed, and my heart slammed against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. The main entrance had double doors, glass and aluminum frames with push-bar exits on the inside and key locks on the outside. I got the first lock turned just as the east entrance came into view through the windows. Movement at the tree line. My hands kept working. Second lock, third lock, muscle memory carrying me through while my brain tried to process what I was seeing. The east entrance was 30 feet away across the main lobby. I could see through the glass doors, across the covered walkway, out to where the parking lot ended and the forest began. Things were coming out of the trees. Got the 4th lock on the main entrance secured and ran for the east doors. The key ring jangled in my grip, metal catching the fluorescent light. 20 feet. 15. The emergency phones kept screaming, that mechanical pulse drilling into my skull. 10 feet from the east entrance when I got my first clear look at what was emerging from the forest. People. Dozens of them. Maybe more. Hard to count because they kept coming, stepping out from between the trees in groups of 2 and 3 and 4. And because my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key into the first lock. Not people. Couldn't be people. People didn't move the way these things moved. First lock secured. My fingers fumbled for the second key. Through the glass, I watched them cross the parking lot, and that's when I understood just how wrong they were. They moved in perfect synchronization. Not marching, not walking in formation, moving together with the kind of precision that shouldn't have been possible for separate bodies. Every step taken at exactly the same moment. Every arm swinging at exactly the same angle. Dozens of figures moving as one. And when one of them turned its head, the others all turned too. Necks rotating in perfect unison. Second lock. Third lock. My breath came fast and shallow. The joints bent wrong. That's what my brain kept trying to tell me while I worked the locks. The joints bent wrong. Elbows hyperextending backward with each swing of the arms. Knees bending sideways on some of them, or not bending at all so the legs moved in stiff arcs. One figure near the front had its head tilted at an angle that should have broken its neck. 4th lock clicked home. I ran for the west entrance. Through the windows I could see them getting closer. That synchronized mass of wrong movement crossing the parking lot. The emergency phone screamed. My boots hit the tile. West entrance 20 feet away. 15. The faces were slack. Empty, mouths hanging open, eyes wide and staring, no expression at all. Just blank masks of human features on bodies that moved with mechanical precision. I got the west entrance locked. 4 sets of doors, 16 individual locks, all secured in maybe 90 seconds. My hands were shaking hard enough that I could hear the keys rattling. The south entrance. One more. I turned and ran through the connecting corridor, past the vending machines where one of the emergency phones shrieked from its mount on the wall. The sound felt like it was inside my head now, drilling directly into my brain. Through the south corridor windows, I saw them reach the building. They stopped. All of them. Every single figure halted at exactly the same instant, and when they stopped, they were exactly 3 feet from the walls. I could see it through the glass. That precise gap between the nearest figures and the building's exterior. 3 feet. Not 2 feet 11 inches or 3 feet 1 inch. Exactly 3 feet, like they'd measured it. I got the south entrance locked. All 4 entrances secured. The emergency phones kept screaming. Then I just stood there in the south corridor, breathing hard, staring out at the parking lot full of wrong figures standing in perfect stillness. Had to be 60 of them at least, maybe 70, spread around the entire building in that precise 3-foot perimeter, all of them facing inward, all of them standing with the same posture, arms at their sides, heads tilted slightly forward, mouths open. One of them was wearing a pen-dot uniform. I saw it through the south windows, standing with a cluster of figures near the southwest corner. Navy work jacket over khaki shirt, just like mine. Same build too. 5'11", lean frame, same wiry shoulders. It turned its head and I was looking at my own face. My legs went weak. Actually felt my knees buckle, had to catch myself against the wall to stay upright. Through the glass, I watched my doppelganger stare directly at me with my hazel eyes and my weathered face. Every detail perfect. The gray at the temples, the hollow cheeks, the exact angle of my jaw. It started walking toward the window, not the synchronized movement anymore. Walking normally. Or what looked like normally until I noticed the right knee bending slightly backward with each step. It crossed that 3-foot gap and pressed its palm against the glass. The handprint matched mine exactly. Same size, same proportions. I could see the lines in the palm. Then it opened its mouth and I heard my own voice. Paul. Measured and careful, flat Pennsylvania accent. The way I sounded on the rare occasions I left myself voicemails. Paul, let me in. My throat closed up. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. Just stood there pressed against the opposite wall while my double spoke with my voice. It's cold out here. Same flat tone I used at work. Same careful pronunciation. I need to come inside. Please. This wasn't happening. Couldn't be happening. I'd locked the doors, followed the rules, done everything right. This was just, what, hallucination? Breakdown? 3 years of overnight shifts finally catching up with me? Grace is worried about you. My voice coming from my face on the other side of the glass. She called, said you haven't been answering your phone. Grace's name in my voice made something twist in my chest. Your mom, too. Helen Kowalski, maiden name. She's worried. The doppelganger's palm stayed pressed against the window. Said you haven't visited since the divorce. My mother's maiden name. Details it couldn't know, shouldn't know. Let me in, Paul. I'm you. I belong inside. The emergency phone screamed. My heart hammered. The figure wearing my face stared at me with my tired hazel eyes. Remember the bicycle accident? You were 9 years old, fell on Maple Street, right in front of the Morrison house. Cut your left knee on the pedal. Its other hand came up to tap the glass. Left a scar. Small one, shaped sort of irregular. I have the same scar, Paul. Because I'm you. I couldn't feel my legs anymore. Couldn't feel anything except the sick, dropping sensation in my stomach as I listened to my own voice recite details from my childhood with terrifying intimacy. I know you're scared. I know this doesn't make sense. My face showing my expression when I was trying to be patient, trying to be reasonable. But you need to let me in. It's not safe out here. Please, Paul, please let me inside. The thing wearing my face pressed both palms against the window now. Behind it, the other figures stood motionless in their 3-foot perimeter, slack faces turned toward the building. Please. My voice breaking slightly, the way it had when I'd begged Grace to reconsider the divorce. Please don't leave me out here. I stood frozen in the corridor, listening to my stolen voice plead. Every word delivered with the same measured care I used when I was trying to convince someone of something important. The emergency phones kept screaming, and I finally understood what the rules were really protecting me from. Rule 6. I stood frozen in the break room while the emergency phones screamed and Rule 6 punched through the panic like a fist through drywall. Road salt from the maintenance supplies can create a protective barrier, but only if applied to all thresholds before the figures make physical contact with the building's foundation. Before they touch the building. I didn't know if I had time. Didn't know if they'd already reached the walls, already pressed their stolen hands against the concrete. But the rule existed for a reason, same as all the others, and I wasn't about to stand here doing nothing while those things circled closer. The maintenance closet was off the main corridor, past the men's room and the information kiosk. I ran. My boots hit the tile in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Too fast, too loud. The emergency phones kept screaming behind me. That mechanical shriek bouncing off every surface until the whole building felt like the inside of an alarm bell. I yanked the closet door open hard enough that it slammed against the wall. The road salt sat where it always did, 6 25-pound bags stacked against the back wall, the kind we used on the walkways when ice made the concrete treacherous. I'd hauled these bags 100 times, knew exactly how much they weighed, how the plastic felt against my palms. Never thought I'd be using them for this. I grabbed the first bag with both hands and hoisted it onto my shoulder. The weight settled familiar and solid, grounding me. Then I was moving again, back down the corridor toward the main entrance, the bag bouncing against my spine with each step. The glass doors showed me everything I didn't want to see. They'd moved closer. Maybe a dozen of them now, spread across the parking lot in a loose semicircle that was tightening like a noose. Close enough that I could make out individual features in the dim light from the building. Close enough that I recognized the face nearest the entrance. My face, my exact face, down to the gray at the temples and the hollow under my cheekbones. It wore my features the way someone might wear a Halloween mask. Everything technically correct, but fundamentally wrong. The proportions didn't move right when it tilted its head. The eyes didn't blink. It was maybe 20 feet from the building, walking slow, deliberate. I dropped the salt bag and tore it open. The plastic ripped under my fingers and the smell hit me. That sharp mineral bite, vaguely chemical, the scent of winter roads and overtime shifts. I grabbed 2 handfuls and started pouring. The main entrance had double doors, each one set in its own frame with a threshold of poured concrete worn smooth by years of foot traffic. I worked fast, dumping salt in a continuous line across both doorways, making sure there weren't any gaps. My hands shook. Salt scattered wider than I meant it to, but I kept pouring, kept reinforcing the line until it sat thick and white against the gray concrete. The salt hissed. Not loud, just a soft sound, almost like a sigh, and thin wisps of steam started rising from the line. They curled upward in the cold air, pale gray tendrils that twisted and dissipated. The concrete underneath looked darker where the salt touched it. Wet, maybe, or stained. I didn't stop to examine it, didn't have time. The bag was half empty already. I left it there and ran back for another one, my boots crunching through scattered salt crystals. The emergency phones were still screaming. I'd stopped hearing them as individual sounds, just white noise now, a constant pressure against my eardrums. The east entrance came next. Single door, employee access, the one Floyd used when he came in for day shift. I ripped open the second bag and poured another line, watching the salt hiss and steam against the threshold. My shoulders burned from hauling the bags. Sweat ran down my back despite the cold. Through the window beside the door, I could see them. More figures now emerging from the tree line in 1s and 2s. They all wore faces I should recognize. Some I did. The trucker from 2 nights ago, the woman in the SUV, faces from missing persons flyers I'd seen tacked up in the break room over the years. Others were strangers, but they moved the same way. That wrong, deliberate walk. They were watching me, all of them. Dozens of eyes tracking my movement through the windows as I worked. I grabbed the third bag and headed for the west entrance. This one was purely emergency access, a door that hadn't been opened in months except during safety inspections. The handle was stiff when I tested it, making sure it was locked. Didn't matter. The threshold still needed salt. I poured another line, thicker this time, and the hissing sound seemed louder in this empty corridor. More steam rose, filling the narrow space with that mineral smell. 3 entrances down. More to go. The loading dock entrance sat at the back of the building, past the storage rooms and the water heater closet. It wasn't really meant for people, just a roll-up door where deliveries came in, but it had a regular door beside it for workers, and both had thresholds that touched the ground. I salted them both, dumping handfuls across the metal tracks of the roll-up and creating a solid barrier across the regular doorway. My doppelganger was at the east window when I came back down the corridor. It stood right up against the glass, that stolen face pressed close enough that its breath should have fogged the surface. But there was no fog, no breath. Just my features staring back at me, wearing an expression I'd never made. Too neutral, too empty. I forced myself to look away and kept moving. The break room had windows but no door to the outside. Didn't need salt there. But the mechanical room had an exterior access panel, and the janitorial closet had a ventilation grate that opened to ground level. I salted both, working methodically through every possible entry point I could remember. My mind kept running through the building's layout, trying to remember if I'd missed anything, any gap, any vulnerability. The emergency phones cut off mid-scream. The silence hit harder than the noise had. I froze in the corridor, salt bag still clutched against my chest, and listened to nothing. Just the hum of the fluorescent lights and my own breathing, too fast and shallow. Then the scream started. Not the phones this time, something else. Something that made every muscle in my body lock up and my hands clench around the plastic bag hard enough to tear it. A woman's scream. High and piercing and utterly inhuman. The sound shaped wrong in a throat that shouldn't be able to make noise. It came from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the walls and the floor and my bones. I ran back toward the main entrance, toward the source. She stood just beyond the salt line I'd poured across the threshold. The woman from the missing persons flyer. The one I'd seen tacked up beside the coffee machine 3 months ago. Jade Warren, 29. Last seen leaving a rest stop in Center County. Blonde hair and blue eyes and a heart-shaped face that smiled out from the photocopied paper. That face wasn't smiling now. Her mouth was open, stretched wider than any human jaw should allow, and the scream kept pouring out. The sound had texture to it, weight. I felt it in my teeth, in my skull, vibrating through the glass doors between us. The vending machine glass exploded. Not cracked, not shattered. Exploded like something had punched through it from the inside. Fragments scattered across the break room floor in a glittering spray. Thousands of pieces catching the fluorescent light. The sound of it mixed with the scream until I couldn't separate them anymore. I stumbled backward. My boot came down on broken glass and skidded, but I caught myself against the wall. Jade Warren's face kept screaming, kept staring at me with those wrong blue eyes while that impossible sound tore through the building. I grabbed the next salt bag and started reinforcing the lines. Didn't matter that she was screaming. Didn't matter that glass was raining down in the break room or that my hands were shaking so hard I spilled half the salt. The barrier was working. She couldn't cross it. None of them could. But I needed to make sure. Needed to pour more salt across every threshold, every gap. Make the lines thicker and stronger until there wasn't any possibility of them getting through. I worked through the scream, through the sound of more glass breaking somewhere behind me. Maybe the display case in the lobby, maybe another window. My ears rang. My jaw ached from clenching it. But I kept moving, kept pouring salt across doorways and loading dock thresholds and ventilation grates. The screaming stopped as suddenly as it had started. I stood in the west corridor, the last salt bag empty in my hands, and listened to the silence. Broken glass crunched somewhere under my boots. The building felt different now, sealed, like I'd locked every door and window and turned it into a bunker. I walked back to the main entrance on legs that didn't feel entirely steady. They were all there now, all of them, pressed up against the invisible line where the salt barrier began. 20 figures, maybe more, crowded against the threshold like protesters at a barricade. I could see their mouths moving, opening and closing in perfect silence, lips forming words or screams or nothing at all. My doppelganger stood in front. Its mouth moved too, jaw working through what might have been speech if there'd been any sound. The expression on that stolen face was the closest thing to emotion I'd seen from any of them. Something that looked almost like rage, if rage could exist without any heat behind it. I stood on my side of the salt line and watched them try to get in. They couldn't cross. I could see it in the way they moved, the way they pressed forward only to stop at exactly the same point, like they'd hit an invisible wall. Some of them reached out. Their hands came within inches of the threshold and stopped, fingers curling against nothing. The salt line hissed quietly between us, still steaming, even though I'd poured it 10 minutes ago. I didn't know how long I stood there. Long enough for my heartbeat to slow, long enough for the ringing in my ears to fade to a dull pressure. The figures didn't leave, didn't back away, just kept their silent vigil, mouths moving soundlessly, eyes tracking me whenever I shifted position. The sky started changing while I watched. Not fast, not obvious, just a gradual lightening at the edges, black fading to something softer. Deep purple first, like a bruise spreading across the horizon, then hints of gray creeping in, diluting the darkness. Dawn was coming. I'd never been so grateful to see morning approaching. Never thought I'd feel relief at the sight of the sky turning pale. But I stood there at the window and watched that slow transformation. Watched the darkness lift degree by degree, while the things outside my salt barrier kept their soundless rage. The figures started retreating when the purple turned to gray. Not all at once. One or two at first, backing away from the threshold with that same deliberate movement they'd used approaching. Then more, turning away from the building and walking toward the tree line with measured steps. My doppelganger was the last to go. It stood there even as the others retreated, even as the sky kept lightening and the parking lot started emerging from shadow. Those stolen eyes, my eyes, stayed locked on mine through the glass. Then it turned, slow and precise, and walked away. I watched them all disappear into the forest. Watched their forms grow less distinct with each step, edges blurring like they were dissolving into the shadows between the trees. The last one vanished just as the sun touched the top of the tree line, and then there was nothing but empty parking lot and quiet woods and the ordinary sounds of morning. My legs gave out. I didn't fall, just slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, my back against the concrete, surrounded by scattered salt and broken glass. My hands were still shaking. Whole body was shaking, actually, fine tremors I couldn't control. I'd survived, followed the rules and survived. The thought should have brought relief, should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt like exhaustion, heavy and complete, settling into my bones like the building settling on its foundation. I sat there until the shaking stopped, until my breathing evened out and the adrenaline drained away, leaving me hollow. The sun was fully up now, morning light streaming through the windows and turning the broken glass into scattered stars across the break room floor. I should call Rodney, should report the damage, explain about the vending machine and whatever other glass had broken, should clean up the salt before a day shift arrived and started asking questions I couldn't answer. Should do a lot of things, but first I needed to rest, just for a minute. Just long enough to convince my body that the danger had passed. I pushed myself up off the floor. My knees protested, joints stiff from sitting on cold tile. I walked back to the main entrance, intending to do a final check of the salt lines before I started cleaning up. That's when I saw the handprint, right there on the glass door, exactly at eye level. 5 fingers splayed wide, palm pressed flat against the surface. But it wasn't dirt or oil or any normal residue left by a hand touching glass. It was frost, perfect white frost, crystalline and delicate, outlining every detail of a palm and 5 fingers. My palm, my fingers, down to the scar on my left thumb from when I'd cut it on a chain-link fence in high school. Morning sun was pouring through the window now, full daylight, warm enough that I could feel it on my face. but the frost didn't melt, didn't even soften, just stayed there, frozen solid, like it had been burned into the glass instead of formed on it. I reached out without thinking, stopped myself before my fingers touched the surface. The handprint sat at exactly the height where my doppelganger had stood, where it had pressed against the barrier, silently raging before retreating with the others. It had left its mark, left proof that it had been here, that it had tried to get in, left proof that it was still out there, somewhere in those woods, wearing my face and waiting for another chance. I stared at those 5 frost-white fingers and understood that the salt barrier had saved me tonight. But tonight was just one shift, and I had a lot more nights to go. Floyd showed up at 6:30 in the morning with someone I'd never seen before. I was finishing my shift log when his truck pulled into the lot, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gray. He climbed out slow, the way he always did, but this time someone else emerged from the passenger side. A woman, shorter than Floyd, built solid. She wore a ribbon shirt, red and blue patterns across the chest, over dark jeans, and her hair hung in a single braid down her back, black streaked with silver. Floyd didn't wave, just started walking toward the building with the woman beside him, their breath making clouds in the cold air. I met them at the main entrance. "Paul." Floyd nodded at me, then gestured to the woman. "This is Brooklyn Salazar. She's a priest, Seneca Nation." Brooklyn extended her hand. Her grip was firm, warm despite the temperature. Her eyes held mine for a moment, dark brown, steady, the kind of eyes that had seen things and decided to keep looking anyway. "Floyd told me what happened last night," she said. Her voice was measured, deliberate, each word chosen with care. "The emergency phones." I glanced at Floyd. He must have called her right after his shift started, the moment he'd seen my salt barriers still intact across every threshold. "Yeah," I said. Brooklyn studied my face. "May I walk the perimeter?" "Sure." She didn't ask permission to enter, just moved past me through the doorway, pausing for half a heartbeat at the salt line I'd laid down. Her eyes tracked the white granules, the careful border I'd established. Then she stepped over it and continued inside. Floyd and I followed. She moved through the building in silence at first, just walking. Her footsteps echoed in the empty corridor. The overnight shift was done. Truckers had cleared out around 5, and the early morning traffic hadn't started yet. We had the place to ourselves. Brooklyn stopped at each threshold, every doorway, every entrance, every point where one space became another. She'd pause, close her eyes, stand perfectly still for 30 seconds or more. I couldn't tell what she was sensing, couldn't tell what she heard or felt or saw behind those closed eyelids. Floyd and I trailed behind her without speaking. She completed the interior circuit in 20 minutes, ending back at the main entrance. Then she stepped outside. The parking lot stretched empty before us, asphalt still dark from overnight frost. Beyond it, the tree line stood black against the lightening sky. Brooklyn walked to the eastern edge where pavement met grass, where civilization ended and the woods began. She started speaking. The words weren't English, weren't anything I recognized. The syllables rolled together in patterns that felt ancient, rhythmic. Her voice stayed low and steady, projecting outward toward the trees. She walked the entire perimeter of the lot, circling the building, and her voice never wavered. I stood near the entrance with Floyd watching. "What's she saying?" I asked quietly. Floyd shook his head. "Don't know the language, but I know what she's doing, which is marking boundaries, letting them know someone sees them." The cold sank through my jacket. I'd been outside for 15 minutes now, and my fingers had gone numb. Brooklyn showed no sign of discomfort. She just kept walking, kept speaking those words I couldn't understand. When she completed the circuit, she returned to where Floyd and I waited. "Do you have tobacco?" she asked. No, I said. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. I brought some, and cedar. Brooklyn moved to the first salt line, the main entrance threshold. She knelt beside it, opened the pouch, and sprinkled dried tobacco leaves along the white barrier. The brown flakes scattered across the salt granules, dark against light. Then she added cedar, the sweet scent rising immediately even in the cold air. Her hands moved with practiced precision, no hesitation, no uncertainty, every gesture deliberate. She blessed each salt line the same way. Every threshold I'd protected the night before, she marked with tobacco and cedar. She spoke more words I couldn't understand over each one, her voice steady and calm. It took her 40 minutes to complete all the barriers. When she finished, she stood and brushed her hands clean. Then she turned to face me directly. "We need to talk," Brooklyn said. "Inside." We sat in the break room. Floyd made coffee while Brooklyn and I took chairs at the small table. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that constant buzz I'd stopped noticing years ago. Brooklyn waited until Floyd set 3 mugs on the table and sat down. Then she folded her hands and looked at me. "This rest area was built in 1987, she said. "Construction started in the spring. They broke ground in April." I nodded. That matched what I knew from the dedication plaque near the information kiosk. "What they didn't tell anyone," Brooklyn continued, "was what they built it on top of." My stomach tightened. "Burial ground," she said. "Old one. Pre-contact, we think. Maybe 300 years, maybe older." The state knew. They had archaeologists survey the site during the initial planning phase. Found evidence of remains, artifacts, ceremonial markers. They built it anyway. Wasn't a question. They built it anyway. Brooklyn's expression didn't change. Moved some of the remains to other locations. Left the rest. Poured concrete and asphalt over ground that should have been left alone. Floyd stared into his coffee. He'd heard this before. I realized. This wasn't news to him. "Things started happening almost immediately," Brooklyn said. "Disappearances. First one was a construction worker in June of '87. Just vanished during the night shift. They found his hard hat near the tree line, nothing else. The coffee had gone cold in my hands. State covered it up, called it a walk-off, said he'd probably hitched a ride to another job site. But then it happened again and again. Different people, workers, travelers, maintenance staff, always at night, always without explanation. How many?" My voice came out rough. Brooklyn met my eyes. 17 confirmed disappearances since 1987, probably more that were never officially reported. 17 people, gone, vanished into whatever waited in those woods. "The state knows," I said. "The state knows," Brooklyn confirmed. "They've known from the beginning. That's why they have the rules. That's why they only hire certain people for overnight shifts. People who'll follow instructions without asking too many questions. People who were desperate enough or isolated enough or broken enough to take a job nobody else wanted. People exactly the hell like me. PennDOT's been managing this for 36 years, Brooklyn said. Keeping it quiet, keeping it contained. The rules work, most of the time. As long as attendants follow them exactly, the disappearances stop. But every few years, someone breaks a rule, or doesn't take them seriously, or thinks they know better. And then there's another missing person report that goes nowhere. I set my mug down. The coffee had left a bitter taste in my mouth. "Why tell me this now?" Brooklyn's expression softened slightly. "Because you survived last night, because you followed the rules when it mattered, and because you deserve to know what you're dealing with." Floyd finally spoke. "Asked her to come, after I saw your salt lines this morning." I looked at him. His pale blue eyes were tired, sadder than I'd ever seen them. "Figured you'd earned the truth," Floyd said. The question sat heavy in my chest for several seconds before I could force it out. "Can I transfer?" Brooklyn's face showed no surprise. She'd been expecting this. "No," she said. "There have to be other rest areas, You can't transfer." Her voice stayed gentle but firm. "Not anymore." My hands clenched against the table edge. "They've marked you," Brooklyn said. "The things in the woods. The moment you saw them, really saw them, they marked you. It's not physical, not something you can wash off or leave behind. It's deeper than that." "I don't understand." "You're connected to this place now, to them. If you leave Cedar Grove, they'll follow you. Not immediately, not all at once, but slowly, over time, you'll start seeing them wherever you go. In other parking lots, other buildings, other dark places." The fluorescent lights hummed. Outside, dawn had fully broken, pale winter sunlight creeping across the parking lot. "And there won't be any rules protecting you elsewhere," Brooklyn continued. "The rules here work because this is their territory. They follow certain patterns, certain boundaries. But out there, in other places, they won't be bound by those same limitations." My throat had gone dry. "You're safer here than anywhere else," Brooklyn said. "As long as you follow the rules, you can survive. You can keep them contained. But if you leave..." She didn't finish, didn't need to. I sat back in my chair. The break room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closer. "So I'm stuck here." "You're needed here," Brooklyn corrected. "There's a difference." Floyd's hand moved across the table, stopped just short of my shoulder. He didn't touch me. Just let his hand rest there, close enough that I knew he was present. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Rodney showed up at noon with paperwork. Floyd must have called him too, explained what was happening. My supervisor walked into the break room where I'd been sitting for the past 3 hours, set a manila folder on the table, and looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "Permanent posting," Rodney said. "Full benefits, pay increase, additional hazard compensation. You'd be locked into Cedar Grove for the duration of your employment with PennDOT." I stared at the folder. "You don't have to sign today," Rodney continued. "Take time to think about it." But we both knew there wasn't anything to think about. Brooklyn had made that clear. I could sign the papers and stay here with the rules protecting me, or I could walk away and spend the rest of my life being hunted by things I couldn't fight or escape. Some choice. I opened the folder. Standard employment contract modified for permanent location assignment. The salary increase was substantial, nearly 40% more than I'd been making. Hazard pay, Brooklyn had called it. Blood money was more accurate. I found a pen in my jacket pocket. My hand shook slightly as I signed my name on the designated lines. 3 signatures total, plus initials on 4 separate pages acknowledging that I understood the terms and accepted them voluntarily. Voluntarily. Right. Rodney witnessed my signatures, added his own, then collected the papers and tucked them back into the folder. "You'll get copies within the week," he said. "Official start date for the new contract is today." I nodded. Rodney hesitated at the door. "Floyd's a good man. Listen to what he tells you." Then he was gone, and I was alone in the break room with the humming fluorescent lights and the taste of institutional coffee still bitter on my tongue. My future, signed and sealed. Guardian of Cedar Grove Rest Area, for however long I lasted. I showed up for my shift that night at 10:30, same as always. The building felt different now. Knowing what it was built on top of, knowing about the 17 people who disappeared, knowing that I was trapped here. It all changed the way the corridors looked under the fluorescent lights, changed the weight of the silence. I went through my opening routine with mechanical precision, checked all the bathrooms, verified the vending machines, confirmed the emergency phones were functioning properly. Then I retrieved the road salt from the maintenance closet and reinforced every threshold. The salt lines from this morning were still there, still marked with tobacco and cedar. I added fresh salt on top, making the barriers thicker, more solid. Brooklyn's blessing might help, but I wasn't taking chances. 11 o'clock came and went. Midnight. 1 in the morning. The building stayed quiet. A handful of travelers stopped through, truckers mostly, plus one family with a sleeping toddler. Normal traffic, normal interactions. I completed my rounds every 30 minutes, checked the mirrors, avoided looking at anything in my peripheral vision, kept my eyes forward in the corridors. 1:30, 2 o'clock. I stood at the east window during my 2:15 check, looking out at the parking lot. The asphalt stretched empty under the security lights. Beyond it, the tree line formed a dark wall against the night sky. I knew what was coming. Knew it the same way you know a storm's approaching when the air pressure changes. 2:13, 2:14, 2:15. She appeared at the edge of the trees, the woman in the pale dress, exactly where she'd stood before. Just standing there, facing the building, facing me. But she was different tonight, closer. Not by much, maybe 10 feet nearer than her previous position, but enough that I could see more details. The way her dress moved in wind I couldn't feel. The angle of her head, tilted slightly as though listening. Testing the boundaries, Brooklyn had said. They'd test me, test the protections, test how much they could push before the rules stopped them. I didn't acknowledge her presence, didn't wave, didn't stare, didn't react. Just completed my visual sweep of the parking lot the same way I would have if she hadn't been there. Then I moved to the next window and continued my rounds. Behind me, through the glass, I knew she was still standing there, still watching, still waiting. The hours crawled past. I checked the salt lines twice more, verified every mirror, kept the break room door closed, followed each rule exactly the way I'd been doing since Floyd gave me that laminated card. 3 o'clock, 4, 5. The woman stayed at the tree line until 4:47. I caught glimpses of her during my rounds, always in my peripheral vision, always at the edge of the lot. Then, between one check and the next, she was gone. Dawn broke at 6:12. I stood at the east window and watched pale sunlight spread across the parking lot, burning away the shadows. The tree line became ordinary again. Just woods, just trees, just the unremarkable landscape that surrounded thousands of rest areas across the country. But I knew better now. Knew what waited in those woods. Knew what I was keeping contained. Knew that the 7 rules weren't just workplace procedures or superstitious nonsense. They were the only thing standing between the darkness and every person who stopped at Cedar Grove Rest Area. And I was the guardian of that threshold. Armed with road salt and memorized protocols and the knowledge that I'd be doing this for the rest of my working life, however long that turned out to be, Floyd's truck pulled into the lot at 6:28. I watched him climb out, watched him head toward the entrance with that slow, measured walk. He'd done this for years before me, carried this knowledge, this burden without complaint. Now it was my turn. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, ready to brief him on the night's events. Ready to come back tomorrow and do it all over again. Ready or not, this was my life now. Guardian of Cedar Grove, keeper of the rules. The only thing standing between the marked ground and the people who traveled through, unaware of what lurked just beyond the pavement. I could live with that. I had to.